Hello, everyone. Welcome to the celebration of Bob Daniels' life. My name is Peter Ladner, and Kashi asked me if I would help guide this event through. We've got a great couple of hours ahead, and we want to get started because I know some of you have to go to the washroom frequently, and it might be a long time. By the way, the washrooms are through here. If you're outside or you want to go outside rather than fight through the crowd, you can come around the back, and there's another entrance in there. But or you can go in the bush. What the heck? Just don't go deep in the bush. I just want to start by mentioning that Bob's family and many of his Montreal and Toronto friends already gathered in Montreal in June for a similar kind of an event, and they are not in attendance, but they send their love. What we're going to do today is have a few speakers, and then we are going to, by 5 o'clock, hopefully, we will be finished the speakers, and we've asked them all to keep their remarks to 5 minutes. There will be an open mic. I mentioned the bathrooms, and then there will be a food break from 5 to 6 where you get to have Bob's favorite food, which is minestrone soup. And then there will be a band playing, as you may have guessed, from 6 to 8. So we hope you can stay as long as you're having fun. I'm going to start with something that Kashi wrote out, and to give some of you a little bit of a background who may not know. Bob was a man of many dimensions. And I'm going to ask you, because I know a lot of people here know Bob or think they know Bob, I'm going to make this into a bit of a quiz, so I'm going to pause every now and again and see who knows the right answer. Bob was a post-war baby, born and raised in Montreal, second in a loving family of 5 kids. We have experts. One of Bob's earliest memories shows his curiosity and independent spirit. Imagine a 3-year-old Bob on his tricycle, leading several other tiny kids from their neighborhood all the way down to the Montreal West train station. Their worried mothers called the police, and hours later they were found on a grassy bank, happily watching the trains go by. Bob's love of playing sports and his inherent talent was nurtured by his dad, who was himself a lifelong athlete. Bob played hockey, football, and baseball. And he won awards in all 3. A highlight was being nominated MVP at a bantam hockey tournament and receiving the trophy personally from renowned Hockey Night in Canada broadcaster Foster Hewitt. Go Bob. During his youth, he fondly remembers the 4 years his family lived in... No, further north, the Lakehead, Thunder Bay. In the cold of winter, he would stuff a Sears catalog into his socks as shin pads, lace up his skates, and skate down the street to the outdoor rink and play shinny for hours. In Whistler, he cherished those special days when Alta Lake froze solid and you could skate the entire lake. After high school, Bob attended Sir George Williams University, now Concordia. He made the Georgians varsity football team and was a defensive linebacker for the intercollegiate all-star team, weighing in at a buff, how many pounds? 190. Bob, you go. During that time, he'd have a 3-day weekend sharing a ski shack with a gang of friends at Saint-Sauveur in the Laurentians. That's when he started skiing and also got into some wild shenanigans at the beginnings, at the infamous pub at the inn where he often worked and socialized. The mountains and ski culture were getting into his blood. Many of Bob's formative life experiences happened on a road trip with some buddies in a what kind of van? VW van with a 10-foot surfboard down the west coast to Mexico in 1969. They were in Mexico City after the aftermath of the 1968 Olympics, made famous by riots and the Black Power salute. Heading north, they happened upon Houston, Texas, while it was still bathed in the euphoria of just landing a man on the moon. Later, on the back roads of upper New York State, they came upon hundreds of disheveled young people, still ecstatic after being at an epic rock concert, the infamous Woodstock. Soon after returning to Montreal and Sir George, there were student protests and riots in solidarity with the civil rights movement. The world was changing and a counterculture was emerging. Bob let his hair grow long and headed west. We'll talk about his hair a little more later. And headed west with no concern for the fact that he only had 22 of the 23 credits required for his university degree. The perfect destination seemed to be a place in its infancy, nestled in the mountains at the end of a windy road. Probably windy too. The Whistler Valley, with its logging slash and clouds of dusty gravel roads, was rough around the edges when Bob arrived. And so were the other people who were drawn here. He came in a drive-away car in the spring of 69 and felt he'd died and gone to heaven. He was in awe of the big mountain experience and the jewel that is Alta Lake. He was also attracted to the youthful energy of the place. Remember youth. The raw frontier potential. And that youthful energy is what kept him here for 50 years. He never looked back. I'm going to ask Cashy to say a few words.
Sorry. It warms my heart to see all of you here today and just to feel all your love and support, which is really valued at this time. It also occurs to me, and everyone has mentioned it, what an incredible venue this is, and it just takes me back to the heart and soul of Whistler and all that has character in this place. And, you know, we really go back in time when we're here on the lake. So this is a written piece that I'm probably going to have to read because I don't know that I will get through it otherwise. If I'm just reading it, that's because it's bringing up lots for me, and that's the way it has to be for now. So how do I begin to portray the Bob we knew and loved when there's a lifetime of memories? On looking back at our earliest encounters, I realized that Bob's essential nature was shining through right from the start. So let's begin there. We first met in December 1970 in Whistler. I was in high school in Vancouver and was up for the weekend. I popped by the Cheakamus Inn to visit my friend Charlie Davies, who was working there as a handyman, alongside Bob. Their task for the day was to go out and find a Christmas tree for the lodge. And I got to go along with them, so what fun. We piled into an old truck and drove it to a spot in the bush, and we had our pick of trees. In our search for the perfect tree, there was always one that seemed better further away. The last thing we wanted was to bring back a Charlie Brown tree. Eventually, we were waist deep in snow, unable to decide, laughing hysterically. What was my impression of this mysterious, fun guy with the long blonde hair and sparkling blue eyes? There was attraction for sure, but he was older at 25 and I was only 16. A spark was kindled, but it would take time. Whistler in the early days with its hippie vibe and crazy parties was exciting for those of us coming up from our conservative upbringings in Vancouver. Toad Hall was amongst a cluster of old cabins at the far end of Green Lake and was home to a motley crew known as the UIC ski team. Nearby was a huge conical sawdust burner from the old logging days where all-night parties would happen. Between the creek crossing to get there and the giant fire inside and all the crazy people and intoxicants, there were a lot of hazards. On more than one occasion, Bob kept an eye out for us silly girls and our excessive indulging and kept us safe. A true gentleman, a tendency to care for the well-being of others. I remember the magic days of spring skiing with time on the lifts and the lift lines spent discussing ideas and philosophy, which he and I had both been studying in university. It was the counterculture era of alternate thinking and mind expansion, and it was fertile and exciting ground. Our friendship was based on these in-depth discussions about values and lofty ideas about everything. The bond of these conversations anchored our connection even then and continued to do so throughout our lives together. Magic, friendships, critical thinker, philosopher. Our first real date was a weekend motorcycle trip to the Gulf Islands south of the border. Along the way, we stopped at a bar for a few beers, leaving our helmets on the bike. When we returned, the helmets were gone. Bob shrugged it off completely, unattached and unfazed. He was not one to sweat the small stuff. Returning home, we had to stay on back roads to avoid the officials, which just added to the adventure. The whole weekend was a fun-loving expression of freedom, riding on the back and holding on to this substantial guy. Freedom-loving, no need to sweat the small stuff, a man of substance who you could depend on. Our next extended date was a whole month ski trip in his 72 Volkswagen Beetle. We drove to the major ski resorts in the western U.S., skiing Sun Valley, Alta, Snowbird, Aspen, Vail, and Squaw Valley. When we were crossing into Montana, we ended up in a huge snowstorm on a road that, unbeknown to us, was not serviced during the winter. The wind had blown enormous snowdrifts onto the road. Using as much speed as possible, Bob would plow that trusty Volksy through the snowdrifts, but having to stop and shovel and push ourselves out repeatedly. Looking back, the situation could have been dire, being the only car out there and having no means of communicating. Eventually, we made it to the other side unscathed and happy to tell the tale of our adventure. I was learning more about this good-natured, generous man. Life for him was an adventure, and all the more fun when you fly by the seat of your pants, winging it without plans. I was also learning that Bob had guardian angels looking after him, a theme that showed up time and time again. Good-natured, generous, adventure-loving, winging it with no set plans, guardian angels. In early 1976, I took off with a backpack on indefinite travels overland to Central and South America. I had been 6 months on the road. Bob planned to meet me in Lima, Peru. His Questmount Mines venture was in limbo, which freed him up to come. He had decided to... Oh, geez, I missed a whole page here. Okay.
We won't even know that. Don't admit it.
Okay. Don't sweat the small stuff. I'll just throw in the characteristics that were highlighted in those stories. Well, anyway, I got to talk about this. When I was going to UBC, I remember Bob coming to our family home to pick me up in his leather pants, long hair, and mustache. My mother would barely open the door a crack, totally freaking out about who I was spending time with. Bob's easy manner allowed him to march to the beat of his own drum, with no need to impress anybody. He was promoting his mining startup, Questmount Mines, at the time, meeting with executives in their fancy downtown offices, trying to sell them on the investment. He would attend these meetings in his usual jeans, ponytail, and that winning smile, eternally optimistic of a successful outcome. He was comfortable in his own skin, never feeling the need to adjust his image for anyone. Quietly self-assured, optimistic, and comfortable in his own skin. So back on my trip to South America. His Questmount Mines venture was in limbo, which freed him up to come. He had decided to travel to Miami and then fly from there. He drove the same Volkswagen Beetle down the West Coast, having fun visiting friends along the way. Then he faced a grueling, nearly nonstop trip across the southern states in the killer heat of August. This showed other aspects of Bob: stubborn determination, perseverance, and incredible stamina. Once he set his mind to something, there was no stopping him. I will quote Bob here from the journal he wrote. "The remainder of the trip to Miami was hellish. I traveled through the deserts of California, New Mexico, and Texas and then the steamy swamps of Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, and into Florida. After leaving Newport Beach at 4 p.m. Friday, I arrived in Tampa Monday night at 8 p.m. completely fucked. There were times along the way when I was delirious and incoherent, talking to myself. Miles and minutes went by when I had no recollection of the road. Someone was looking after me. Afterwards, he just shrugged it off, never one to dwell on things. Stubborn determination, perseverance, incredible stamina, and not one to dwell on things. In Miami, he decided to leave his car with 60-year-old Sarah Reynal, the night manager he had just met at the Miramar Hotel, where he had stayed. The next day, after she dropped him at the airport, he watched his Volkswagen as it bunny hopped away, realizing that she had probably never driven a Standard before. That VW was the only car Bob ever bought brand new, and still he was able to stay completely unattached to it. Just as Bob trusted in the universe to look after him, he inherently trusted people, always believing in their basic goodness. This afforded him a certain fearlessness and acceptance of whatever the outcome. Trust in the universe, belief in basic goodness, fearlessness, and acceptance. From Miami, he flew to Lima, arriving in a city in complete turmoil with tanks in the streets and a curfew. That rendezvous and the following months of adventure finally solidified our relationship. We had some adjusting to do to really get to know each other, but looking back, that was when we considered ourselves a couple and what we celebrated years later as our anniversary. That was 47 years ago. Bob had to be patient, waiting for this restless young woman to settle and to be ready to commit. The next 8 months were spent traveling cheap and rough all the way. We're getting to that. Okay. The next 8 months were spent traveling cheap and rough all the way to Tierra del Fuego and back. We experienced one magical place after another, meeting a vast array of crazy and quirky people who are also on the Gringo Trail. Bob loved interacting with everyone and hearing their stories and perspectives. The quirkier, the better. The trip in those days was the epitome of the road less traveled, enduring hardships and every manner of grueling transport, including the bucket of a tractor. But hardship was not new to Bob. He had worked at many tough and nasty jobs, not the least of which was staking claims during the winter in Timmins, Ontario, in 40 below weather. Willingness to rough it, love of quirky people and their stories, not one to complain or dwell on suffering. If our courtship was unconventional, the following years continued that way. It was 1977 when we moved to Whistler and started Snow Goose Transportation, losing money every year. Eventually, with a bit of dumb luck, we sold the business and made enough to buy our lot in Tapley's farm and build our house, a kind of enforced savings plan. For 7 years, we also ran Orca Tours, a camping tour business for Europeans. And there are some of our drivers here in the audience. I did see them. There they are. 2 of them right back there. They were all friends. It was always friends we hired, both for Snow Goose and for Orca Tours, etc. So all in the family. In 1983, we built our house together with the help of builder Ralph Jensen and Don Bigger. The house has transformed over the years with Bob's tasteful upgrades, but our home is still on Easy Street and has served as a family haven for 40 years. Late September 1985, we surprised our parents by inviting them on a boat tour of Vancouver Harbor, and then told them we were getting married right then and there. The boat was called the Barely Legal. That's true. Which was appropriate because we were already 5 months pregnant. A fact that was becoming more and more difficult to conceal. Then there were the blessings and challenges of having and raising 2 beautiful daughters in a resort town. Bob gallantly shouldered the responsibility of supporting the family, tirelessly embarking on a vast array of jobs, culminating in a 35-year career as a realtor. Those girls were the light of Bob's life, as was his little grandson Beau in more recent years. He was hugely supportive of the girls and all their varied endeavors, as well as mine. Bob was essentially a free spirit, and that pursuit of freedom colored everything about him. He liked nothing more than the open road on his motorcycle, the wind in his face, the promise of new people and experiences ahead. Skiing, especially in Powder, kayaking off the West Coast, mountain biking, playing hockey, and hiking all afforded him this sense of freedom as well. Bob loved being outside and spending time in nature. It brought him tremendous peace, freeing his spirit and giving him perspective on our insignificant place in the universe. In his working life, Bob was never afraid to get his hands dirty or to try something new. He was almost always self-employed or worked on short-term stints and contracts far and wide. He somehow balanced his work life with our passion for extended travel adventures, which took us to Asia and Latin America almost every year before the girls were born and after. Again, his unconventional free spirit was at play. For Bob, there was endless curiosity about the world around him. He was passionate about the economy and in keeping abreast of the business world and current affairs. With equal interest, he studied Eastern philosophy and let those principles guide his daily life. If he wanted to feel physically free, he also wanted the mental expansion of thought that came with reading the mystics. He loved listening to music, especially jazz. He loved his laughter-filled phone conversations with his siblings and lifelong friends. He loved the sanctuary of home and office he had created on Easy Street. His favorite thing to do at the end of the day was to soak in the bath with a glass of scotch and read business articles or his favorite philosopher, or both. He relished the privacy and isolation of Nelson Island to indulge another expression of freedom, nudity. He would sit reading and drinking his morning coffee on the deck completely nude. In the afternoon, he would relax on our granite beach in the nude and then dive carefree into the refreshing ocean. Bob had an insatiable appetite for life and all the varied people in it. Kindness was his religion, which he practiced daily. He could relate to his multi-billionaire clients or street people equally, making them all feel comfortable. Whether in the locker room, on the chairlift, in a coffee shop, or in a realtor's meeting, he had the gift of engaging people. When donating to Goodwill, he would always travel personally down to the downtown east side to look in the eyes of the people there, the ones who were receiving his clothes. Free spirit, unconventional, hugely supportive of others, lifelong learner, genuine curiosity, insatiable appetite for life, and unconditional kindness. So Bob would be disappointed to be missing this gathering of so many of his favorite people. But he would also be miffed at all the fuss being made over him. He hated being the center of attention and was an expert at deflecting conversation away from himself, so he could learn about others. Bob was not meant to grow old, and he was never one for long goodbyes. The handout with the explanation, the inserted explanation, I don't know if you have that, but anyway, it's there so that it captures Bob's essence, his heart, his heartwarming smile, his humor, his free spirit, his principles of living, and his perspective on life. So that's all in here for you to put on your fridge at home. You can put the page with the picture, or you can put the page with the signs and symptoms of inner peace, which is what he did live by and what he looked at every single morning before making coffee. So I want to just say thank you to Bob for everything. And thanks to all of you for all of your love and support and for being here from the bottom of my heart. And I apologize, Peter, I definitely took more than 5 minutes. But I'm allowed to.
Cassie, did you take my list of who's talking? That lost helmet became a bit of a theme. We did a cycling trip in Mexico, and Bob did the whole trip for 1 week, wearing nothing but a red bandana on his head to protect him from grievous head injury. Daryl Kincaid, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daryl Kincaid. My wife is Diane, and my daughter is Erin. I want to talk about the word nice, because that was Bob Daniels. And I thought about it a lot here the last little while. And my definition for the word nice is somebody that's kind, loving, and caring. Somebody that's considerate, compassionate, somebody that respects the world, everything in the world, whether it's alive or not. Somebody that's humble, and above all, somebody that's honest. That was Bob Daniels. He is the nicest man I ever met. Period. We shared lots of adventures together. It didn't matter where we were, whether having coffee at the back end of the Spearhead at 8,000 feet, sitting on the deck of a boat looking at a sunset over the Hecate Straits that went on forever, biking in the red rocks of the desert, or even just trying to do business deals where we're sitting over the hills of San Jose. Bob and I shared the same views of the world. And our view is that the world is a wonderful place. People are wonderful people. And it was just, he was the nicest man I've ever met. So we shared lots of adventures. The ones that really stand out are the hiking trips that we would do in the fall. Particularly for many years, we would go and we would walk into Singing Pass with the girls. And we found a great place to camp inside the park, and we would light a fire. So Bob didn't believe in rules all the time. Actually, he didn't abide by them, okay? Whether it was, a said rule or unspoken, we'd just adjust. And that was the beauty of Bob. I would like to say that you don't get to choose your family. That's just who you get. I'm happy, I'm glad, and I'm very blessed that Bob chose me and my family as friends. Thank you very much.
David Mandel, just while he's coming up, I have a list here of Bob's work history. It's very long. I won't read it all. But I would ask if anybody can just call it. Cassie's mentioned a few jobs. Daryl actually was involved with a job of Bob's as a commercial fisherman. Anybody else name any other jobs that Bob had?
Whistler Water Slide.
Whistler Water Slide manager. Yes, sir. I don't know, did you ever go down the water slide in the lawn chair with Bob? We'll get to that. David.
I'm also going to read because nobody likes to see a whimpering old guy. Except for Daryl. I'd be way worse. Hey, Bob, I'm going to talk to you with the hope that somehow you're listening to us. I'm happy to share with this group of people, so many of who love you as I do. Would you approve of this gathering, particularly the fact that we're gathering to talk and reminisce about you, and above all, remember the ways you've touched us, been part of us, and how you enjoyed being part of our lives? Yeah, probably not. You'd probably tell us to choose a more interesting subject or someone more deserving than you. After all, nobody is really that important, are they? We're all here for a short while, specks of dirt, and nobody is as important as all this, right? Well, I cry bullshit. I know that the hole in my heart that has been there since I learned that you headed on your next journey, left us behind to fend for ourselves, devoid of the capability to discuss politics with you, rehash philosophical ideas, talk about love, or just shoot the shit about all the many subjects you considered knowing about, either through reading, chatting to friends, or strangers alike. There were so many sources of information for you. Reading any kind of media, chatting with people you came across in a gas store, a lineup at the cashier, or whatever, or whoever. I can't really set my memory on the subjects of the conversations we've had. There were so many: religion, Hebrew, Buddhism, Hinduism, etc., politics, Trump, Gandhi, Netanyahu, Trudeau Sr., Trudeau Jr., Polyev, sports, business, stock market, money policy, great companies, lousy companies, our respective businesses, music, but not too recent, other than the songs your daughters had exposed you to. And I was always amazed at how many people you were up to date on, friends, friends of friends, etc. Above all, you were interested because, well, you were inclusive. You were interested in the details because those details were as important as the big picture. And you were kind. Bob, you were so zen. Zen, but not too zen. You had such an even temper. Or so I thought. On a kayak trip many years ago, I got to witness a slip-up. Bob and I, once Kashi had decided not to continue on the trips, would be double kayak, tent, meal partners on several trips. One time in Nootka Sound on the west coast, Vancouver Island, it was Bob's and my turn to make dinner for the group. Smoked oysters, cheese hors d'oeuvres, already finished. Really, you're rather compact on these trips, particularly when it comes to stoves and fuel. Picnic tables? Stuff is on the ground. One little freestanding burner with a very large pot on it, with all kinds of veggies and some sort of delicious Thai peanut sauce, looking good, smelling better, our best work. And then one little slip as Bob nudged the pot handle. And the dinner was in the dirt. A brief moment of silence by the very hungry group. And then Bob cut loose with a string of profanities to match how pissed he was as the enormity of the situation set in. Silence. shock. And then we broke into hysterical laughter and applause as we realized that Bob had broken the seal of Zen that surrounded him. Picking that loose dirt out of our teeth as we ate was hardly a big deal compared to how much mileage we got out of never letting him forget how much entertainment he had provided us with, as he became a mere mortal before our eyes. Bob was always good for staying for a cup of coffee or a beer, bumping into one another, waiting for hordes to head down the mountain, dropping in, whatever. Bob loved music, as I've already offered, just not music that was composed too recently. He always lamented that he wasn't much of a singer. That said, Bob certainly appreciated those who could sing and showed great appreciation for those who could. But Bob could hug with the best. I miss those hugs. Luckily, he and Kashi have passed that technique on to Claire and Mia. Some of us have tried with varying degrees of success to put together playlists that remind us of him, or that we could listen to with the hope he's listening along with us. In a way, to me, Bob was music. He was a guy that was made up of notes, some picked out of the air randomly, but mostly a fine composition of great harmony, well thought out lyrics, a blend of sounds that evoke emotions that you never want to have leave you. I'm hoping I always remember the words, the notes that were composed so wonderfully together into what is now the memory of him. Thank you.
Thank you, David Mandel. David actually put together a playlist of Bob's favorite songs, or what he thought were Bob. Did you just make that up, or were those actually his songs? Your playlist. And the band is going to play a couple of those songs later just because of that playlist. Michael D'Artois is our next speaker. While he's coming up, Bob had this knowledge of international affairs that always astounded me, and I discovered quite recently that it was because he subscribed to Foreign Affairs, and I made it was a quarterly, big, fat, scholarly kind of thing on, and I made the mistake one time of saying that must be interesting, and he sent me a subscription. I did read some of the articles. Come on up.
Darrell and David, thank you. Darrell and David, thank you. I have some small print here, so this is a collection of a bit of Kashi and a bit of me. I'm going to start with, it's hard to see the room with that window back there. Darn window. Darn view. I'm going to start with some of Kashi's notes, which we've heard a lot of already. Most of you remember Bob as a realtor, which he has been for the last 35 years. In the early days of Whistler, you had to be creative in order to survive. He was willing to seize every work opportunity, whether those offered to him or ones he created himself. Let's take a look at the eclectic mix. Peter, you've covered a lot of them already. Bob's first job in Whistler, then called Alta Lake, was in the spring of 1969. Melting snow around the recently built Christiana Inn. just across the lake over there. It revealed all the construction debris that had been there all winter. Sandy and Putty Martin hired Bob and a friend to clean up the mess. Bob was always willing to get his hands dirty. During the winter season of 70-71, he worked as a handyman at the Cheakamus Inn with J.R. Who's J.R.? And which lift did he like to ride? Thank you, Cassie. John was not a skier. But he felt left out that we were all riding the orange chair, you know, and doing Goat's Gully or something. So when he came in and he heard everybody talking, he says, I ride the purple chair. Bob earned $200 a month plus room and board, a season's pass, and a share of the tips if he stayed until the end of the season. His bar tab at the Cheakamus was regularly more than his monthly wage. But getting to ski every day on a big mountain and making so many local friendships made his arrangement more than worth it. When the West Side Road was being extended to Alpine Meadows in 1972, he drove a water truck, keeping the dust and fires at bay during that scorching hot summer. He fondly remembered early mornings paddling a canoe from the little log cabin where he lived across the lake to get to work. Like so many in the early days, Bob had to go elsewhere to find work. So from 72 to 76, he teamed up with partner Alex Clark, starting their junior gold mining company, Questmount Mines. He did everything from selling shares to executives to hands-on prospecting and field exploration in the bush, and the majority of this took place north of Timmins at 40 below. But Bob never saw this as a hardship. In 1977, although I had met Bob before 77, he was in Ontario a lot of that time. This is when we first connected, really, to get to know Bob. Bob and Cassie started Whistler's first bus service, Snow Goose Transportation. They offered a scheduled service within Whistler and a taxi charter service, which included the Vancouver airport. They worked as drivers and managers and did everything else necessary to keep the small business afloat. Just want to mention that there are people in the audience where I met Bob. His second stop on his schedule travel from Alpine Meadows to the gondola base was to go to Garrow Condominiums, which was Robin Cromley and Gabriella Cromley had some condos on Timber Lane, and they would rent them on a short-term basis. So Snow Goose would pick up their clients at Garrow Condominiums, and then the next stop was going to be the Valley Inn, which was on Nestor's Road, about where the grocery store is now, on Nestor's. So I ran a little B&B there, and I could sleep about 15, 16 people. But I had a breakfast every morning, and I had customers. But Bob's stop would be right there at the Valley Inn, Snow Goose van coming up to the door. And he would inevitably, he or Kashi would walk in, sit down, have coffee. I'd offer them breakfast if they wanted it. You know, it was just gift made in heaven for me, because oftentimes there was so much snow. How are your guests going to get to the mountain? As a matter of fact, we have one person here tonight who was probably one of the first people to stay in the Valley Inn, and it was so reasonable. He stayed for 3 months. And he was from Thunder Bay as well. And anyways, he came back second season and third season. And that is Monty Clemens, who's here in the room. So, so they worked as drivers. They did everything necessary to keep the small business going. And eventually they had a van, 5 school buses, a leased highway coach, and a mix of colorful local drivers, which I'll get to in a minute. The main bread and butter of the business was the contract with Whistler Mountain to shuttle skiers between the Creekside base and the garbage dump that was soon to become Whistler Village. That was when Bart Ross and Nigel Trotter had Whistler's first commercial espresso machine. The school bus painted brown, and it was parked at the bottom of the Olympic run. The village was the garbage dump. We're under construction, and everyone's at the end of the day would say, "Hey, let's go down and have a cappuccino." And I don't think we even heard of lattes at that point. Anyways, it was tunes, dogs, and coffee, and treats, and it was wonderful. And then Snow Goose would be there to take people back to the gondola base. So the bus also met the train each morning, and Bob and Kashi had a contract to manage the little train station. Anybody know where that train station was?
No, it's still there.
It's sort of still there, but it's not a train station anymore, really. It's down at Nita Lake, just right there. But Bob and Kashi actually looked after it and landscaped around it and put plants in it and made it a comfortable little train station. It was very cute. Finally, in 1981, the Snow Goose was sold to Grey Line of Vancouver. For 7 years, starting around 1979, Bob and Kashi started and ran Orca Tours, summer camping tour business for Europeans. I wish I had been on one of those. The tours went across Canada, made a circle tour of BC and Alberta, also ventured down the coast to LA. Here again, both Bob and Kashi were drivers as well as managers of the logistics of all the various groups. They hired friends to be the drivers, guides for 6-week trips. You two drivers back there, did you do any of those? You did, huh? Did you ever have to deal with Ed Gordon? No. So I just want to put this in here because Ed, who is back in Ontario now, did do one of those trips. He did one to Toronto and one back again. Hey, Michael, to the best of my ability, some others may offer corrections. So here's some of my recollections going back to the late 70s. I worked for 2 failed attempts at transit in Whistler. Then came Snow Goose, the real deal. I wasn't their best employee. Bob did have to reprimand me on one occasion. I think I was late. I hope it was only once. The fleet was in good shape, a good crew of drivers. Some were females, I assume. Bob and Kashi didn't require us to identify. I did one trip for Orca Tours, Canadian camping trips, Vancouver Airport across Canada to Toronto Airport. What a fabulous opportunity, a mixed group of European folks in their 20s, setting up camp every night, doing our own shopping, great variety in our meals as everyone took turns cooking. Got another group in TO and headed west, taking the Yellowhead in Manitoba across to BC. Stopped for lunch at a ranger's campsite in BC beside a creek. One of the Dutch guys asked, "Where do people live in this country?" I know many of us played old-timers hockey with Mr. Daniels. He was a gentleman on the ice and a fine player. Bob and Kashi always went to Vancouver Folk Festival, and I often ran into them there. Sometimes caught a ride there or back. When we would see each other in the village, we would take time to chat about bands and music, any music we were listening to. I'm sure it has been a difficult summer for Kashi. I'm also sure she has a solid base of close friends that are here for her and with her. Take care. Ed by the Otenabe River. Yeah. So to continue, you stole a lot of time, Kashi, so I'm going to borrow some from David. Always been a housing crunch in Whistler, and in the 80s was no different. Bob found his own solution. He made arrangements to be general contractor building a house in Alta Vista for a couple he'd met while driving the bus. In return for managing the project, Bob negotiated 3 years of free rent in the suite of the house. Bob also managed the property, finding friends to rent the upstairs portion of the house. I think that was the Hampsons. That's right. 2 daughters, Erin and And during the fall of 1983, Bob worked as a roofer with Doug Bach, installing the metal cladding on the new Pika's restaurant on Whistler Mountain. With fresh snow almost every day, the job involved endless shoveling just to access the cold metal. No doubt Bob and Doug's humorous banter is what kept them going. One summer, let me just see, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. It's coming. One summer in the early 80s, Bob was a commercial seine fisherman with longtime friend and seasoned fisherman Daryl Kincaid. They fished all up and down the west coast and north to Prince Rupert. Despite the demanding work and long hours, Bob savored the new experience and the chance to see the BC coast in summer glory. Sometime in the mid-'80s, Bob's friends, Jim Allen, Bugs Johnson, are they here, by the way? Started a company called Weatherhaven Industries, which set up turnkey camps in remote locations. They were fabric structures, but included insulation, flooring systems, electrical, plumbing, heating, even a sewage treatment plant. Bob worked as expediter on these ambitious ventures, which took him to Greenland, Ellesmere Island, and Alaska. Always willing to go elsewhere and try something new, Bob seized this opportunity to be in the far north during the midnight sun with a gang of interesting people, including Whistler builder Richard Langevin. The Whistler Springs Water Slide and Spa Pools opened at the base of Whistler Mountain in the village in 1985. Bob became operating manager, the position he held until 1987. One of the favorite after-hours things to do by the staff was to launch themselves into the slides, riding on plastic lawn chairs and literally flying down the slides. Bob was known to take Claire as a tiny infant in his lap and ride the slide, but thankfully without the chair. Bob knew how to make things fun. It was myself who got Bob into real estate, a career that lasted him a good 35 years. He completed the course, started working for me at Remax of Whistler in 1988. Stayed there until 1992. Unbelievable to have Bob in our office, as all of you know. I mean, to have him near you at any time, and always welcome person to have in the office. One of the highlights, not many people will know this, but the first $1 million sale of a house in Whistler was Bob Daniels as the realtor. Yeah. You probably get 4 for your house now. Which does take me back a little bit, if I can freewheel it a bit. Tapley Farm. I mean, this room, the heartthrob of Whistler is here in this room. And you know, Tapley's was not going to happen. The first application for development turned down. Council didn't want it. We got rid of that council, put in another council. Lo and behold, that 80 acres got developed. I think 80 lots were developed, and they came on at $40,000, and everyone picked a lot number out of a hat, and they got their housing, secure housing in Whistler. Many people still there today. Let's see, in 1992, Bob completed the broker's license, which allowed him to branch out to start his own business, where he worked as an independent agent broker out of his home office for 15 years. Late in 2007, Maggie Thornhill started the Thornhill Real Estate Group, invited Bob on board to act as her broker. Bob continued to work as a salesman, but took on the added responsibilities required of being the office's licensed agent broker. First time he's really had a real job. A lot of responsibility with that one. And I'm sure Bob handled it extremely well, as we're probably going to hear about so shortly. So Bob stayed on when Engels and Volkers came on, Bob stayed on as a salesperson. And as a realtor, Bob brought impeccable integrity, a calm demeanor, good listening skills, and attention to detail. He went over and above the call of duty to serve his loyal clients with his deep understanding of the economy, the markets, all the various properties. Bob loved the people part of the business. Retirement was not in his repertoire, even at 77. Bob never shied away from hard work. An important part of his makeup and identity were wrapped up in the work he did. He was never afraid to try something new or to get down in the trenches and get his hands dirty. He always brought fun and enthusiasm to whatever he did, and Bob had tremendous respect for the working person, no matter what their social stature or economic bracket. In your handout here, signs and symptoms of inner peace, if I can share with you, there are 9 of them here. The last 2, I feel, connect for me very strongly about who Bob is. This is contented feelings of connectedness with others and nature. Frequent attacks of smiling through the eyes from the heart. That's my Bob Daniels. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And on that real estate theme, I'd like to ask Maggie Thornhill to come up. Whoops. Oh, there she is.
I'm going to bring a tissue with me. I didn't think I needed one today, but actually I may. Hello, everybody. I'm going to read as well. It's lovely to see so many people here to celebrate our beloved Bob. And you too, darling. Bo, your grandpa talked a lot about you. Thought you were the best. This gathering is about a life well lived. Yes, there is sadness. Of course there's sadness. But there's a great joy in remembering him. We can all hear his laugh, that infectious knee-slapping laugh. We can all hear it now if you really think about him. I'd known Bob for many years as a fellow realtor. But our real friendship blossomed when Bob agreed to take on the role of broker when Max and I decided to go it alone. It was how Bob was operating on his own book of business at the time, so it was easy for him to move over with us. So he exchanged his home office to our office in Creekside in October 2007. So our deep, deep friendship began. Bob is someone who genuinely cheered other people's successes. He loved helping everyone to improve and to get better. He was a perfect fit for us. Bob was an adventurer, an entrepreneur. He was knowledgeable about everything. Politics, we've sort of talked about a bit of this already, but you talk to Bob and it would be about politics, world economics, business, sports, music. I mean, he was just a mine of information. There wasn't a topic he didn't have complete grasp of. But he was a listen first kind of guy. He was always there to listen to the issues and to give great advice. Oh, how we miss those wonderful 3-hour lunches. Max will attest to that. There wasn't a problem we couldn't solve, mostly with great humour and a really good bottle of wine. But while Bob knew so much and helped everyone, his favourite topic was always his girls. A smile came to his face as soon as he mentioned Kashi, Claire, and Mia. Bob was an amazing human being. He was so good at so many things and friends to so many people. But being a family man was what truly defined him. It was what gave him the most joy. Bob lived a happy, healthy lifestyle, surrounded by people he loved and those who loved him. Please keep telling these stories we've listened to today and add more of your own so that we can all keep the precious memories of Bob alive with us forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. We're going to have Mia and Claire come up, and then we're going to have an open mic. There are 3 seats here that are just empty. If anybody's aching on their feet and wants to sit down, come sit down. Who's first?
Thanks everybody for being here. I said, it feels like my heart is breaking. Kashi said, I know, me too. Just make sure it's breaking open. Open. Open for all of life's embrace. My heart is breaking open. Arbutus trees, midsummer's heat, red paper bark splits open. Arbutus trees, midsummer's heat, red paper bark splits open. Curls up, peels away, bright green and smooth and tender trunk exposed. A softness deep inside me, now closer to the surface, as grief holds hands with love. The fragility of the flesh and the immensity of the soul. I heard it in the wind last night. It sounded like applause. Chilly now, end of summer. No more shiny hot nights. It was just the arbutus rustling and the bumping of the logs. And the moon swept down Blackwater like an empty spotlight. In May, I spent a week with 4 of my best girlfriends, camping and surfing on the west coast of Vancouver Island, a place that always feels like coming home. The wild and gnarled coastal trees, green upon gold. The layered rainforest canopy embraces you into her arms. Ancient cedar driftwood and nodding bull kelp covers the sweeping beaches. Waves of the wild and cold Pacific Ocean, there is no taming. Full moon overhead casting her mysterious shadows, illuminating the magic, the mystery, and the connectedness of it all. Here in this place, the ocean surrounds me, wild embrace. I feel the quiet and calm returning to my body. Bob, I feel you close when I am here, connected with it all, opening my heart to the world. I feel you with me. I feel you a part of me. You have always been our rudder, seamlessly guiding the family ship. You've always been my constant of love and unending support. I wear your talisman necklace at my heart. I am learning that grief can be an opportunity to celebrate love and the preciousness of life, time, and relationships. A few years back, the 4 of us celebrated your birthday here on the West Coast together. It was November, and of course this meant extremely stormy weather, sideways winds and torrential rain. But this didn't stop us for a moment. We biked into the 50-kilometer-hour headwinds to the far end of Long Beach. We took a boat to Vargas Island, hiking in head-to-toe rain gear and gumboots through knee-deep mud to the far side of the island and the beaches of the Wolves. We ventured to the infamous blowhole, awestruck and amazed at the power of the waves of the 50-year storm, blasting through the rocks and shooting hundreds of feet into the sky. During my adult years, Bob's November birthday had become a family tradition, coming together for some kind of spontaneous adventure, and I always cherished Novembers for this reason. This is Bob's 65th, and some of you probably recognize the old rope swing at the far end of Little Quarry Lake on Nelson Island. The perfect arc. Together, you and Kashi instilled in me the spirit of adventure, travel, and a love of the outdoors. From such a young age, we were living the virtues of simplicity and spontaneity, while being filled with the curiosity, confidence, and humility that such in-the-moment experiences allow for. For me, these childhood memories of adventures are simply pure joy. Not every father would be ecstatic about their daughter living in her car, but I could hear the genuine excitement in your voice when you joked how Alexa and I were living in our oceanside duplex, which was really our cars parked side by side, living light for another summer of surfing. You understood too well it was not about hardship, it was about freedom, adventure, and simplicity. In my creative pursuits, I always felt not only your support, but your genuine curiosity, interest in how you truly valued the creative expression. You always went way out of your way to support small businesses, local craftsmen, and creative individuals. And the Easy Street House is a testament to the value you placed on the handmade, unique, and individual. One of my favorite things was to drink our morning coffees together in the cafe at the cabin on Nelson Island, looking out into the colorful twisting trunks of the arbutus grove, glowing in the morning hour. This was a place where we read philosophy, sharing words of wisdom, which we would often lead to lengthy conversations of all things life and death. Bob, you are the king of love. You showed me what love looks like. In a partnership, I saw what it was to be in love. Raising a family, I felt love every single day. Love and respect and support for your family, friends, co-workers, you could always be counted on. You were not always the most graceful, but you lived a life of grace. With a lack of judgment towards yourself and others, you were able to live each day with a sort of radical kindness. You opened yourself to the world, and what followed was a life without fear, full of spontaneity and joy. Nina Simone said, "Freedom is having no fear." And I believe you lived and experienced this sort of unbound freedom. Today, I feel grateful, such an immense gratitude, and so much love. Thank you for sharing such a beautiful life together. Bob, the universe is within you. Bright and beautiful, I hold you close in my heart. Forever, I will feel you as I explore the mountains and the oceans with the wind in my face. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So glad to see all your beautiful faces. Thank you so much for coming. Guess I'm taller. Hi. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's great to see you all. Guess I'm taller than the rest of my family here. There we go. Thank you. So, Bob was a son, a brother, a friend, a teammate, a colleague, an uncle, a husband, a father, and a grandfather. When I was learning about grief with my 4-year-old son, Bowden, I learned about the invisible string. People who love each other are always connected by a very special string made of love. Even though you can't see it with your eyes, you can feel it with your heart and know that you're always connected to everyone you love. We are connected to Bob by our invisible strings of love, and our invisible strings connect us to all those that love Bob. Love never dies. So what of this grief? It's human nature to always want more. Yet it is the gratitude that grounds us and brings us closer to Bob. The grief is returning to gratitude. Eloquent words from my cousin, Stephen Daniels. I am grateful for all of our time together. Family travels to Mexico, Central America, and Asia, exploring different cultures and present tense living. Shared passions from taking me as a child on his runs, father-daughter mountain bike trip to Moab when I got my driver's license, Bob at 69 learning to surf with us in Mexico, skiing together for 37 years. Yes, I skied with Bob as a baby in a backpack. And the simple day-to-day, coffee in the sunshine, dinners, patiently showing me again how to chop firewood, laughter, big hugs. I am grateful for our closeness. I remember Bob coming to watch one of my high school volleyball games. When my shift was done, I happily slumped into Bob's lap. My teacher later remarked on this ease of closeness, which almost surprised me. I have always felt a special closeness with Bob. As a parent, Bob fostered independence. Like when we were teenagers, he would ask, "What time are you going to be home from the party?" And when we were in university, he sent us off with accounting ledger books to keep track of our finances. He also showed us the importance of interdependence. Connection to family, community, nature. Living by example the values of integrity and kindness. Prioritizing experiences over things. Bob was there for me in every way, with open arms, open mind, and open heart. I am grateful that Bowden lights up when he talks about Bobbio. Bob wasn't into being called dad or granddad, so he was Bobbio to Bo. They had the best time together. Bob and Bo dance parties, bike adventures to coffee and grilled cheese. teaching Bo to ski. These are the bike adventures to grilled cheese. Running wild and free at Nelson Island. Making the fire together, snuggles on the couch. This is Bob's last day of skiing, the end of December of 2023 with Bowden. It was minus 20, so it is a very short clip. Oh yeah, 2022, pardon me. Bob had a special silly when Bo was around, and I see Bob and Bo every day. I am grateful we were with Bob when he died, holding his hands. And despite the chaos, I got to tell him he was the best dad and the best granddad. He was surrounded by love. I am grateful Bob was at peace with death. In his words, I am along from the journey, but it's been a good ride. I'm at peace with it all. And we honor him by being at peace, living in peace. So with gratitude and in peace, thank you for this beautiful life, Bob. You will always be in my heart.
Thank you, Claire. We have a little time left. I know Mike Ryan wanted to say something, and anybody else who has a few things to offer. And everybody said so many nice things about Bob. I just have to say, if you've ever driven with him, there's one unnice thing about Bob. He would put the seatbelt on until the dinghying had established his sense of independence and freedom, and he couldn't stand the noise anymore, and he'd finally buckle up.
Bob. I'm a proud member of the Quirky Friend Club. Proud to say that. And Kashi, I have an Orcas Tour t-shirt, and damn it, I should have worn it. Because I was one of the guides. I just want to talk briefly about this. That smile. There was a lot I could say about my friend Bob, who I've known for almost 50 years. But what I want to talk about is that smile. That smile that made me feel so welcomed, so appreciated, respected, and above all, acknowledged. With a hint of cheekiness and humor, I might add. A smile that revealed the wisdom of many years of world travels and life experiences. A man grounded, comfortable, and present in his own skin. Bob was like a mentor to me. He taught me respect. An example of that was, I remember traveling with Bob and Kashi in Thailand back in 1982. We took a small boat, fishing boat, out to an island to spend a few nights. And it was called Koh Phangan, and at that time it was a very peaceful, quiet island. Apparently it's changed a lot. As we pulled up to the dock, a local man who they had rented a place with these small little huts before, came running out to greet us, with laughter, calling out an exuberant, "Mr. Bob!" There was that respect for an honest and genuine human being. So just to finish, so when Bob was strolling down the beach after a morning of a mushroom omelet,
Magic mushroom.
wearing nothing but a local leather thong, it didn't look cheesy, out of place, sleazy. It was just Mr. Bob with a big smile on his face.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody else? Come on up. Paul? No, you're it. But and then Paul.
I could do this now.
Yep, you have to be at the mic so they can hear outside.
So here's my wingman. My name is Richard Langevin, and I had the pleasure of working with Bob on a number of projects. If I may start with, I first met Bob when I visited, Bob and Cashy rather, when I visited Pat and Paul Bader, their neighbors, and Paul Martin was in that same subdivision. It was a lovely place called Tapley's Farm. Bob wasn't much of a hugger. He was a shaker. When he greeted you with a handshake, it was always with a stiff arm. You couldn't get close to him. And he had a bone-crushing grip, which he would eventually release you from with a glimmer in his eye and a full-hearted laugh at the end of it. Thankfully, Bob wasn't a cruel man, and we did survive the handshakes. Towards the end of a meeting, I might be able to sneak in a small hug. I remember a few things about Bob. Some of the things which he liked to do was ski, to motorcycle ride, play hockey, shinny. I recall one evening when Paul Martin invited me to go to a shinny game on Green Lake. We pulled up, it must have been around 9 o'clock at night. The lights were on. There were two men with snow shovels and skates, and they were clearing off a fairly sized rink under the lights. And they were moving fast with those shovels. It was not much snow, but it was pretty impressive to watch. I later found out that one of the skaters, the one I didn't recognize, was Chuck Blaylock. And he was an airline pilot, and he had played for, I found out later on that evening, after a beverage, that he had played for the Montreal Junior Canadiens. Bob's team was the Montreal Canadiens, as was mine. I also found out as we started to play that Paul Martin could skate backwards faster than I could skate forward. So to even things up, I got to play with Chuck and Paul and Bob on the other side, and the four of us played for hours. It was well past midnight when we stopped. And I recall Bob telling stories about outdoor rinks in Montreal, and Chuck telling stories about being a young man playing for their junior Canadiens. I also recall Paul Martin telling stories about his 1967 Maple Leafs, the last time they won the Stanley Cup. He was quite pleased with that. Another thing that Bob and I used to like to do is ride motorcycles. And one of our favorite rides back in the late 80s was to Anderson Lake and back. And we were on our way back from Anderson Lake one day, one afternoon in the fall, end of biking season. And there's this straight. And many of you will know it. And the deal was to spin up to 100 miles an hour or $1.60, and then ease off and then just ride home gently or at pace. At about 140, Bob hits the brake light and we see the cop car ahead of us. He passes us, and I guess he got me. We found out later he got me at 110. He must have missed Bob because, but he knew that we were going at great pace. And I recall Bob saying that it was a beautiful day for a ride. The road was clear, it was a straightaway, and it was a beautiful day for a ride at great pace. Anyway, the officer must have been a rider because he bought it. And he started talking to Bob about his beautiful Moto Guzzi. And later on, we got off with a warning. And we rode home and had a wonderful time. Since then, on many rides, mostly to the beer farmers and back with Brian DeGrave and other friends. But that was a great, it was a great experience for me for riding with Bob way back then. Another thing I recall about Bob in his skiing and his riding, he had great style. Bob would lean into a turn, whether it's on his motorcycle or on his skis. He didn't bother with angulation. He didn't bother with checking his line with a bit of brake or a bit of counter steering. He just leaned into it perfectly and came out of it hard on the throttle. He was a superb rider. I know this because in my natural position was behind him. And I will forever remember that throaty roar of that beautiful motorcycle as he's pulling out of the turn. I did wish that Bob had shared with me his suffering at the end. I had no idea he was ill until he had passed when Cashy phoned me. Then I realized soon after that that was not Bob's way. Bob did not want any of his friends to be upset or to suffer. May his memory be a blessing. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I will. Those are my next words. I'm Paul Richardson, Cashy's brother. My son Adam is in Europe right now, and he is very sorry he wasn't able to make this occasion. Adam has written a few words about his Uncle Bob, which he has asked me to read to you. So this is his message. I want to apologize for not being able to be present on this important day. Although I am not able to be there in person, I am very much there in spirit, and have asked my dad if he would be able to say a few words on my behalf. For those of you who don't know me, I am one of Bob's nephews on Cashy's side. My Uncle Bob always provided an incredibly calming presence for me. Whether it was the weeks I spent with Bob, Cashy, Claire, and Mia in my childhood, or the weekend I spent with Bob and Cashy on Nelson Island in the summer of 2015. I always felt Bob's warmth and spirit when I was around him. He had a smile that could quite literally light up the room, and a laugh you could pick out of a room of 100 people. Those are two of the things that I most remember about him. Whenever I spoke with Bob, I knew he genuinely wanted to hear about how I was doing, and was not simply asking for the sake of asking. As I'm sure many of you can attest to, Bob was an incredible listener, and you could really feel that he was not just listening to the words, but he was really hearing what you had to say. I know that he truly cared. During the early stages of the pandemic, a particularly lonely period of time for many of us, Bob found out that I had been staying in Whistler by myself for a prolonged period of time, and decided to give me a call and to take me out to dinner. At that point in time, I hadn't really spoken to anyone in weeks, and like a lot of people, I was struggling with the effects of the prolonged isolation that we were forced to endure at that time. After spending a few hours with Bob, I left feeling more positive than I had in months. No matter what, Bob always focused on the glass being half full and made sure that everyone around him felt the same. The last thing I'd like to say today is of something Bob once said after a family dinner at Whistler. We were sitting in the living room at Bob and Cashy's house, and we're discussing some of the different places we had each traveled over the years. Having had many adventures himself and talking about some of the time he had spent in South America, Bob smiled and said, "I think in life people just want a place to live, some good food, and great company. That's all you really need." I think those words represent Bob at his core. Like all of you, I love and miss Bob dearly, but cherish the time I got to spend with him and the memories I have of him. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anybody else wants to say a few words? Anything? Well, if not, Mr. Quinn.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Peter Quinn, and it's nice to see everyone here. I think almost everyone here has traveled with Bob, down to the grocery store, up the lift, all over the world. But one of the trips I got to do with Bob happened just about 50 years ago this month, and that was up the Black Tusk. And it was a trip we did without supplemental oxygen. We did have some performance-enhancing window pane, which we split into 4 pieces, there being 4 of us. And whoever supplied it is conveniently not remembered at this moment. And then we continued, and we continued with every step being one of awe and amazement and no exhaustion. Amazing. So we got to the top of the Tusk, and we looked down at the Helm Valley, and it seemed pretty monochromatic. We thought this is a good place for a performance piece, and so we pulled out a couple of our brightly colored Frisbees, and we threw them down, and we called it Frisbee on Cinder. That was it.
Anybody else? Okay, I know you're all restless to move a little bit. I'm going to just finish with one quick anecdote. In Bob's later years, like really late years, I introduced him to a friend of mine called Gideon Flitt, who cuts hair in Vancouver. And Bob, somehow, I'm told, he told me he went all the way to Vancouver to get Gideon to cut his hair. And for many people, this would be a kind of an act of vanity, because Bob, at that point, he'd lost the blowback look and he was into the sort of silver bow wave look that you probably remember. And when I called Gideon to tell him, he said, "Oh, Mr. Sunshine." That was their name for him at the hairdresser. So the sun's a little less bright now without Bob, but all of us are a little brighter. Thank you so much. So now we have some food. Oh, Sally Ann. And we're not even, but Sally Ann's got a very short thing to do, and then Cassie's going to wrap it up and then do the food and other stuff. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sally Ann. So I just have a little thing to say first. Like many of you here, I knew Bob for many decades. And I just want to say something about Bob, the yes man. Not that I ever thought he was a hanger-on or a suck-up or a sycophant, but rather I want to tell you about my take on his unique and endearing use of the word yes. When we saw each other after some time had passed, Bob always had the uncanny ability to glean something that was dear or currently important to me and ask about it. It could have been a person, place, project, or perhaps a pet. He'd ask and I'd answer and he'd reply, yes, with a very slight lift at the end of the word. To me, that meant two things. I've heard you, and I'm still interested, and so I'd continue. And I'd get another yes, till I'd said all that I wanted on the matter. It was unique, very gratifying, and special. That yes was so Bob. I loved it, and I'll miss it. Okay, now I have a little transitional piece to read that's on the back of your pamphlet. For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to breathe the breath from its restless tides, free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountaintop, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance.
And we do get to dance very shortly. It's just to pull this off today has required the input from all of you to make the huge effort to be here, and some have come from far and wide, and I really appreciate each and every one of you to make that effort and to be here for all of us. We feel your love, we feel your support, and it's just incredibly important in our transition. But other than that, I want to especially thank Michelle Crow. Michelle Crow has been involved with the vision of this day, the planning, the logistics, the orchestrating. Every single inch of the way, I've been dependent on her, and we've all been, she's just been well, I call her the energizing buddy. You know, she's just behind it all and just working like a fiend. And Michelle, could you stand up, please? And on the way here, we decided that we're really family now. In addition, the Point crew. So Stephen, all the way along, making the arrangements to be here. He's just been amazing. Tim Smith with the audio-visual. Raj doing the sound. Peggy in the kitchen. Katie and Emma running the bar. Later on, we're going to hear music from Guilty Pleasure, which is the band that Peter Ladner is in. And when they start playing, they will introduce themselves, and we can appreciate them then. But I just want to thank them for being here and making it a fun and really celebratory event. Jan, Gail, all the soup helpers, and all the Sweet Table contributors, thank you so much for all your effort, and we will imbibe and enjoy. To Peter, the MC, thank you, Peter. MC extraordinaire. To the speakers, to Daryl, David, Michael, Maggie, Sally Ann. What we're going to have now, as Peter mentioned earlier, is Bob's very favorite food, which was soup. He would eat soup 365 days a year. So it's minestrone soup from Pasta Lupino. I want to make a real big, strong plug. They have been absolutely delightful to work with. So Rachel, Kendra, and Kevin of Pasta Lupino, amazing food. Enjoy when we're done here. And that's it. So soup, pizza, focaccia bread, and then dancing. And really sweet to see all of you here, and thank you all. And to Bob, who's behind it all.